While NASCAR's roots and the majority of its history is in the United States, there's been plenty of times where the sport has ventured outside the US. It's been in Canada nearly since its inception, along with races in Australia and Mexico. Despite mall sport being the only race in NASCAR that's run outside the US, there's still a few series that run under the NASCAR banner. You can travel a little south of the border for the Peak Mexico Series. You can travel to Europe for the Wheeling Euro Series, or you can travel up north for the series that most of you are probably familiar with, the Finity Series, which probably produces some of the best racing that not too many people are familiar with. While all of this is great, there's one instance of NASCAR heading overseas that's pretty interesting to say the least. For a short time, NASCAR held races in the land of the rising sun, Japan. The 90s consisted of big changes in NASCAR. Most were good, some the opposite. While it had been primarily in the southeastern US, the sport was rapidly growing in every way. Sponsorship, TV ratings, exposure, you name it. NASCAR was booming, and it didn't take long for someone to propose bringing NASCAR overseas. That person would end up being Hiromichi Suzuki, the general manager of Suzuka International Racing Course. After attending Daytona and falling in love with what he witnessed, Suzuki headed to NASCAR's headquarters, unannounced, in February of 1994. Somehow, some way, he got an appointment with Bill France Jr. and proposed bringing NASCAR to Suzuka Circuit. At the time, Suzuka was bringing in many disciplines of motorsports. Why not add another with NASCAR? Bill agreed to the idea, as they started working on a plan to hold exhibitions in Japan. After surveying the track, the ink was finally put to paper in November of 1995. NASCAR would hold an exhibition race in Japan in November of 1996. With 31 points races being on the schedule for next year, not including the Winston, the Busch Clash, and the Twin 125s, the adding of yet another race seemed like a chore more than anything, not to mention it would be taking place overseas. While the crews weren't necessarily ecstatic, many drivers were optimistic upon hearing how Japan sometimes embraced Western culture, and maybe NASCAR would be next. However, it might be a challenge to break into Japan. With Formula One being the pinnacle of motorsports, many in Japan didn't necessarily look into American disciplines of motorsports, leading to some having never heard of NASCAR. As it turns out, just saying the word NASCAR in Japan might get you some confusing looks.
Okay, this is a true story. NASCAR. Nas means eggplant in Japanese. Ka means question mark, questionaries. NASCAR sounds like, is this an eggplant? So that's a huge culture gap.
As the event for the questionable eggplants neared, details of the event were released. NASCAR would run 100 laps on Suzuka's East Circuit, utilizing the long front straight and the iconic S's before rejoining the main straight. With the season at its conclusion, NASCAR headed to Japan as teams shipped their equipment 7,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean. With many high-profile NASCAR drivers entered in the event, there were a few Japanese drivers who wanted to try out the stock cars. One of which being Keiichi Tsuchiya. If you haven't heard about him, you're missing a hell of a story. Tsuchiya started his racing career in the Fuji Freshman Series. Unlike most drivers who have a family history in motorsports, or just a heaping ton of money, Tsuchiya directly credits street racing for his career, where he honed his craft and became an underground legend. I almost feel bad saying he's an underground legend. I'll just give you a few examples. Have any of you ever seen the Tokyo Drift installment of the Fast and Furious franchise? You remember the scene where Sean is learning to perfect drifting on a loading dock, and the two fishermen are critiquing his performance? Well, that's Keiichi Tsuchiya, and much like Takashi is in the movie, Tsuchiya is referred to as the Drift King in real life, so much so that the iconic Initial D series is largely based off of him. He's also a large reason that the AE86 that's used in the series is so iconic. But being the king doesn't come without its drawbacks, as he got his racing license suspended for taking part in the Plespy video, where he took part in illegal street racing. He did get his license back, and made a pretty respectable career for himself. A year before NASCAR would hold its exhibition in Japan, he earned a class win in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, finishing 8th overall. Now, he's going to try his hand at stock cars. As the event was unfolding, it seemed to be going off without a hitch. Many people of Japan were taking a liking to how NASCAR ran things, especially the ability to be close with the drivers, something no other motorsport is like. Unfortunately, an unforeseen tragedy would take place. During a test drive of the circuit, pace car driver Elmo Langley began experiencing chest pains. He was immediately taken to the Suzuka General Hospital, where he was pronounced dead after suffering a heart attack at age 68. Unfortunately marred in tragedy, the event continued on. As the green flag flew, it became quite clear that the Suzuka circuit was well suited for stock cars. The race itself would be a prime example of stock car racing as well. Hard racing, close battles, and even some ruffled feathers, as Hideo Fukuyama was punted by Wally Dallenbach. While Fukuyama took the high road, saying it was a racing incident, his car owner Travis Carter was very upset.
Known Travis a long time, but don't know as I've ever seen him this upset. Travis, what happened?
Just from the monitor, it looked like a boneheaded move by Winston Cup regular. I mean, the 15 had just changed tires, and obviously he's going to be a little quicker, but he just drove into the back of this guy and wrecked him. It's a shame. It's a shame for the fans, of course, here in Japan. Fukuyama was one of their local heroes, and tremendous guy, great competitor, and one of the finest men and most fun people we've ever been associated with. So I know it's a disappointment for him. It's a disappointment for us and all the fans here in Japan. It's too bad. He ran well. He worked hard. We sort of started him in a hole, hurt him some, but the guy's quite capable of racing with these guys. I think in a good situation, he could beat them.
As the dust settled after Robbie Gordon crashed in the S's, it would come down to a one-lap shootout to the finish and an absolute dogfight for second place.
Green, headed for checkers.
Boy, this ought to be wild. You can see them shaking the cars down through there to clean the tires as they head down to turn one. Here comes Gordon on the inside of Earnhardt.
Gordon holds third spot. Now he's trying for second. He's up on the inside. Even across. What a battle for second place.
That was his chance. I don't believe he can get Earnhardt, but he made that bold move on the inside in turn two. He's looking on the inside of Earnhardt again.
No points, just pride right here. Takes another shot at him. Gordon is right there. Works down to the inside and from that car just in front of his brake pad. Rusty Wallace looking back at the field as they go through the S's.
Okay, what he has to do now is exactly what he's doing. He's put the bumper to him just a little bit to move Earnhardt to the outside. Jeff Gordon fighting on the inside.
Here they come for the checkered flag. Wallace coming down, Gordon on the inside. And as they come to the line, oh, you want to call that one?
I'm going to wait for a replay.
After leading 84 laps, Rusty Wallace would take the win. Overall, the 1996 event was considered a success. It had some interesting names in the top 10 as well, with guys such as Wally Dallenbach, Johnny Benson, Bobby Hillin, Mike Skinner, Rick Corelli, and Butch Gilliland. Keiichi Tsuchiya would be the highest finishing Japanese driver in the field, coming home 15th. With the success of the first event, NASCAR returned to Japan the following year in 1997. The 1997 event would be bumped from 100 laps to 125. It also featured a unique occurrence as a heavy rainstorm covered Suzuka during qualifying. With rain tires and windshield wipers fitted, NASCAR qualified in wet conditions for the first time in modern history. The driving in the rain wasn't necessarily the hardest part. Vision became a problem, with the insides of the cars fogging up. When qualifying came to an end, Mark Martin was sitting on the pole, with Australian touring car legend Jim Richards starting second. Keiichi Tsuchiya would also make his return to stock cars, qualifying 7th. Both Ken Squire and Buddy Baker spoke very highly of him during the pre-race, speaking of his driving style and his notoriety of being the Drift King. That wasn't the only time drifting got mentioned during the pre-race either, as Kenny Irwin Jr. and Kenny Wallace went to a local drifting event. They liked what they saw, so much that they decided to try it out for themselves. While their drifting needed work, this is something pretty crazy by 1997 standards. Drifting was not at all mainstream in the US, and wouldn't be for years to come. Seeing drifting on national television in America years before its boom period in the States is fascinating to me, and I honestly can't put my finger on why. As the green flag unfurled, many of the favorites from last year's race were taken out of contention early. Last year's winner, Rusty Wallace, blew an engine just a few laps into the running, and Dale Earnhardt would be caught up in an accident early on, but still continued despite being many laps down. While Mike Skinner would go on to win the race, Keiichi Tsuchiya stole the show. After starting 7th, a spin would put him deep in the field. He would charge through the pack and show off the skills that made him famous before an eventual 11th place finish, once again being the highest finishing Japanese driver in the field. In 1998, NASCAR would once again return to Japan, though this time not at Suzuka, as plans were cancelled in early 1998. As a result, they settled on a new track, Twin Ring Motegi, which had only been open since August of 1997. The configuration of this track is unique, as it features a 1.5 mile oval, along with a 2.9 mile road course. Unlike other facilities that feature a roval combination, the two tracks are separated. The oval track lays over top two sections of the road course. For this race, NASCAR would race on the oval. The event would mark a special occasion for the Earnhardt family, as Dale Earnhardt and Dale Earnhardt Jr. would compete against each other for the first time in a NASCAR race. The race itself would see many lead changes, as 7 different drivers swapped the lead 21 times. Keiichi Tsuchiya would once again step behind the wheel of a stock car, but would unfortunately fail to finish after a crash. As the race neared its end, it came down to a battle between Jeff Gordon, the 3-time and reigning Cup champion, and Mike Skinner, a driver who had never won a points-paying Cup race. As Skinner came off the final turn, the TBS crew captured a pretty hilarious soundbite.
Moving closer, inching it up. Here they come for the finish. Skinner stays in front.
While Skinner and the rest of the 31 team celebrated the win, the post-race press conference offered little to be hopeful about regarding NASCAR's future in Japan. NASCAR President Mike Hilton stated that since the 3-year Cup Series contract to run in Japan expired after the 1998 race, the Winston West Series would hold their season finale at Twin Ring Motegi in 1999, where Kevin Richards would take the checkered flag. While the races themselves were pretty entertaining, the venture did poor commercially. Due to the high cost to transport equipment, cars, and drivers, NASCAR didn't return to Japan after the conclusion of the 1999 Winston West race, seeing the end of NASCAR in Japan. While the events weren't overly successful, it's still a big milestone in NASCAR's history. At the end of the day, NASCAR just didn't take off in Japan. It just wasn't at that level yet. There have been glimmers of hope for international exhibitions in years past. Germany, China, and Australia have all been rumored, but have never reached beyond the point of speculation. Who knows if we will ever get to see something like this again? If we never do, these events should never be forgotten. The racing, the interviews, the memorable moments, the cultural exchanges, they all make for fond memories. It's just a shame that it ended so soon. And with that, I'll end it here. Thank you all for watching. I'm Jesse King, and I'll see y'all around.